Tom, this was a bit of a weird weekend for me.
Well, it is a weekend in 2020, so it should be
true.
weird.
It fits the trend.
Yep.
I have been, you know this about me. You've known this about me for years. I have been a lifelong sports fan. Anything and everything. I don't care if it's basketball, baseball, hockey, tennis, golf, football, anything. I will sit and watch it. I even worked in sports as my first job in life. And it was the kickoff of the NFL season. And normally this is a holiday for me. Normally I'm the guy who shows up to work the Friday before football season with my Broncos pullover on, and I'm geared up and I'm ready for the game.
Yep.
And on top of that, the Broncos are opening the season on Monday Night Football. Usually that's a big deal. And it's at home. And I say it's at home because my family has had season tickets forever. Mm-hmm. There was never a point in my life that we didn't have season tickets that I could go to a game. And I've missed very few. And this week's game, I didn't even watch. I couldn't.
That's a big deal.
I just couldn't bring myself to do it.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of reasons why, but it all boils down to one thing, and it's this politicization of everything in our lives, of literally everything that we do.
Right.
And sports for me were a respite. Sports for me were the chance to get away from work, to root and cheer and be along with friends who it didn't matter what we agreed or disagreed on anywhere else in life.
Right.
When it came down to Broncos football, we could all sit in a room, we could be loud, we could cheer. Yep. I could show up at a stadium and I could be around 76,000 people who I guarantee don't agree with me on 90% of the things I believe in my life.
But you could all focus on the game.
We could all focus on the game,
yep.
And we could all cheer for the same team.
Yep.
That's been slowly losing its...
In fact, let's be clear. You actually had a lot in common even with people cheering for the opposing team in the sense that you're both interested in the game. You're both interested in the sport, right? You're both interested in what's going on the field. You're cheering for different teams.
Right.
But your attention, your focus is on the game, on the sport, not on something else, certainly not on something political.
And my focus was not just that was a good play or that was a bad play. It was, what are the coaches doing? What are the injury situations? When it comes to baseball, I mean, baseball for me was always the love of the chess match, right? I know you and I are both huge baseball guys. It's the chess match of the game. It's what's the next pitch going to be thrown? Where's the catcher going to line up? What's the runner going to do? What are the coaches going to do? There was so many aspects of sports. And in football, it was fantasy football. People get into betting. You have all of these things.
Right.
And it all just became unappealing to me this year. And I'm still not sure how to handle that. And for two reasons. One, because I've lost something that I love. I've lost my love for something that was really a huge part of my life. And at the same time, I don't feel like I have something else to turn to give my attention to get that respite that I was looking for. Because, like we said, everything has become politicized.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And, and it's interesting. I want to talk a little more about how and why everything has become politicized. But first I wanted to point out, this is it's a fascinating thing. It's an alarming thing. It's a troubling development, what's happening with professional sports. Many people will look at what's happening right now and they'll say, well, that's not that big of a deal. If they take a moment to, at the very first game of the season was the Chiefs game last week, and they did this thing where they stood arm in arm, or maybe they play a separate anthem for a certain group of Americans, or some take a knee, some stand, whatever it is. And one of the questions I've been raising is, where does this go? In other words, if I think, and I'm not even sure, I'm a fairly well-read guy, and I don't know for sure what all the protests, what all the kneeling, what all the playing of other anthems, what its purpose is, what its goal is, what its focus is supposed to be. I think many of them right now are kneeling and doing things like that to protest what they understand to be racial injustice. And that's a whole question, whether what they perceive to be racial injustices actually are race-based injustices. I think in some instances they are, and in some instances they might not be, or at least it's debatable. But my bigger point is, what other causes are going to be brought into sports? If things start, are we going to start protesting things happening around the world? Because at any given moment, there are bad things happening all over the planet Earth, right? And should sports now become the venue, the place to bring attention to these things, to hash these things out? It's unclear where all this ultimately goes.
You're absolutely right. And I keep asking the question, you look at some of the atrocities happening in China, for example. Mm-hmm. The Uyghurs in concentration camps being harvested for organs for Chinese elites, millions of them.
Right.
And Muslim Americans are focused on the United States government or the United States, the other citizens of the United States as these awful people, while other Muslims in another part of the world are just being ignored.
Right.
And I can't get my head around, where does this go? What do they want? And how do we fix it?
Right.
And at the same time, and this may sound shallow, but at the same time, I think there's a time to talk about it. And there's a time where I would just like to enjoy something. I'd like aspects of the American way of life to just be fun again. Right? To steal the Trump line, can we make America fun again? Can we make life fun again? Can we have those things again?
It's funny. I'm sure our members of the Vino Veritas Society will have a very hard time believing this, but I was quite ornery as a kid. I was in trouble. I was in trouble with teachers all the. I was always the kid talking when I wasn't supposed to be talking. Right. My parents got called to the school more times than I can recall. Things like that. And growing up, the one little getaway from everything, even when things were ugly, when I was in trouble, when things looked bad, my dad would get home from work and we'd go out in the backyard and play catch with a baseball for 20 minutes or something. And when we were playing catch, we just played catch. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. If we did talk, we were talking about playing catch. We were talking about the baseball and how to hold it and different grips and different ways to throw it and things like that. We set everything else aside. And that little moment to just breathe and enjoy life and honestly, it helped my dad and I bond and be closer together. And, even though I had been a little shit and was supposed to be in trouble for things, and we would get to that. That was coming. But we could still do these other things. It's like that little area of life. There are some people who just say we can't have anything like that, any kind of peaceful moment.
The image I just had in my head as you're telling the story, knowing where you're from in a small town in the Midwest.
Yep.
I'm picturing Field of Dreams. I'm looking at the end scene of Field of Dreams, and I'm thinking, did he build a baseball stadium in the backyard?
Something kind of like that, not nearly as elaborate. But I mean, so here we are. We're in 2020, and we are living in the most progressive era of American history, of world history. And again, just to remind everyone, when we say progressive, we're talking about the conscious effort toward total central planning, government central planning of everything. I'm reminded there's John Dewey, who was one of the kind of the intellectual giants. He's considered one of the few top tier philosophic minds to come from the United States. And John Dewey gave a speech turned into a lengthy essay in the mid-1930s. So think of the mid-1930s, FDR as president, the New Deal, all these government programs, the idea of entitlements and economic rights. These are all on the surge, on the upswing. And John Dewey gave this speech contrasting the new liberalism, meaning the New Deal version of liberalism, FDR's version of liberalism, versus the old liberalism of the founding. The liberalism, people like John Locke and Adam Smith called themselves liberals, that old-fashioned classical liberalism. And the contrast that Dewey makes is very revealing for our world. He said that old liberalism basically looked at the individual human being like a Newtonian atom, just an individual all alone, and The whole purpose of liberalism was to make sure the individual was secure in his freedom
Right.
and in his property, and that's it. And other than that, the politics of liberalism, old classical liberalism, government, according to old liberalism, wasn't there to make sure you led a certain kind of life, or that, right? It said you're free, you're secure, go make of your life what you want to make of it. And some people made much of that freedom, of that opportunity. Others made less of it, but it was an individual choice. And he contrasts that with modern liberalism, new liberalism, 1930s style liberalism. And he says the new liberalism knows that the individual on his own or her own is nothing. That to make an individual into a fully functional, mature, happy, developed person requires a whole community. Kind of sounds like a book Hillary Clinton wrote. What was it? It Takes a Village, right?
Takes a village.
And Dewey makes the argument, he says the new liberalism, it is concerned with far more than just the individual freedom and the property of a citizen. It is interested in all the institutions surrounding that individual. So it is interested in economics, in business, how businesses are run. It's interested in religion, what gets preached from the pulpit. It's interested in education. It's interested in healthcare. It's interested in our culture. It has to take an active interest, that's his phrase, an active interest in all the aspects of life in order to produce the kind of citizens modern liberalism aims to produce. Now, this is the same John Dewey who really helped create the very idea of schools of education,
right,
which paved the way for modern education. And his whole point about education is that schools should be creating modern, progressive, socialist citizens. That's their ultimate highest purpose. And boy, the way he described modern liberalism taking an active interest in all these areas of life pretty much describes exactly the track we've been going down over the last 75, 80 years or more. Government getting involved, either regulating somehow or subsidizing, or both, in many cases, regulating and subsidizing everything, education, healthcare, any topic that comes up today immediately becomes a political topic. Because it doesn't matter what the topic is, government is involved one way or another.
When we talk about these things, we tend to take a look at them from the top down, right? We say, okay, government is going, if there's this hierarchy of progressivism, government is the thing where maybe top down isn't the right way, but it's a spider web, and government is at the center of it, right? And its tentacles reach into every aspect of our lives. Let's flip that conversation for just a minute. Let's look at, if you're on the outside of this, you're the individual.
Yeah.
And you've been taught this your whole life. You've been told this over and over. Government is your opportunity to grow. Government is going to give you every chance you're going to have in life. The only chance you have in life is through government.
We could summarize it this way. The progressive view is that government is your provider and your protector.
Right. And so if you're looking at it from that perspective as the individual, you stop looking at things as what can I do to improve my station in life, my lifestyle, my way of life, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
What can I do personally to who do I need to either fight or grease the wheels?
Right.
I got to do one of those two things, right? Because you have now told me I am incapable. I am completely incapable of building myself a good life without somebody, whether it's government or whether it's the elected officials in the middle or the bureaucracy that they create or the people that the bureaucracy chooses to help first. You have this ever expanding spider web, and you've now told me I have no chance of improving my life unless I can either fight you or fight and take your spot,
right?
Or grease your wheels,
which means bribe you, for some favor, some perk, some benefit, some handout, something.
So with that in mind, I don't think people really know what they want. I don't think people actually know none of these people who are fighting, whether it's on the football field, whether it's fighting over politics or anything else, I don't think they know, here's what we want the end goal to be.
Right.
These are just protests to say, you're not giving me my fair chance to improve my life. I don't know you well enough. I'm not in a position to grease your wheels. I shouldn't have to grease your wheels. I'm defending these people over here who aren't capable of greasing your wheels because they don't have enough money. They don't have the assets, the opportunity. So we're going to fight you instead.
Well, it'd be a fascinating conversation to have, and I would like to have it if it was possible to bring in a guest representing the kneelers, the protesters, and if we laid out and we said, we are the Vino Veritas Society. We are people who love the United States because we love the American idea. Mm-hmm. We love the United States not merely because it's our country. I mean, that's partly why we love it. It is ours, and that's natural to love whatever is yours.
Like a sports team.
Like a sports team, right? And in the case of a sports team, you even root for them when they're having a bad season. They're still your team, right?
And I can attest to this. Growing up, I was the one who sat at all the Nuggets games when they were winning, when they were going 10-72.
Right.
They were winning 10 out of 80 plus games.
Right.
And I was still sitting in the stands in my gear and rooting and screaming and yelling at the refs for making a bad call and everything else. And it didn't matter if they won or lost because in the grand scheme, this team was going nowhere.
Right.
So I could attest to that was my team.
But they were your guys, right? So you root for the team that's yours, whoever's local, who's close, and that's part of why we love the United States. It's ours, and we're the first to acknowledge it's not perfect, never has been, likely never will be. But when you compare it to other countries, by golly, it's really exceptional. It's really, well, first of all, it's the first country ever that was founded on these ideas, and the ideas are perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. That idea that every human being has a natural rightful claim to his or her own freedom, his or her own private property, and laws should protect that. That is a perfect idea. There's no way to improve upon that idea because the only way you could start to change it would be to exempt some people and say, no, you, this group over here is not going to be secure in their property or their liberty. And that's a move towards injustice.
Right.
So America was founded on this idea of justice, and through much of our history, we were trying to rise up to that idea to make sure that our policies, our practices align with that idea. And if we were to sit down with some NFL kneelers or Major League Baseball kneelers and say, here's our goal. We want to get to a place where every citizen is protected by law in his own individual liberty, freedom to live his life as he wants to live. And that includes things like use his property, and he's secure in his property. And you can use his property however he wants, which includes things like going out and starting a business. It'd be very easy. You want to use your property to start a business? Knock yourself out, go start a business. You want to sell it to whomever you want to sell it, and ask any price you want to ask because it's your right. That would be freedom, real freedom, equal protection of the laws for the liberty of individual citizens. That's our goal.
Right.
What would the kneelers say about that? Would they agree with that, do you think, or does that not address their main concerns?
I think part of it is that they don't believe it. They don't believe that's even possible. They don't know anything but progressive government, right? I mean, when we really talk about this, and we've had this conversation, there have been many more progressive politicians, presidents, legislators, jurists, everything. Yep. There have been many more progressives since the New Deal than there have been not.
Correct.
Right? It's not even close. They don't know any different. Progressivism is the only thing they understand. And so they're sitting in this world where they're saying, we are not being treated fairly, whatever they define fairly as. And there's no way that we can fight for total freedom. So let's we have to fight for something, right? We can't bribe our way to this, although a lot of NFL players probably could. And I would argue a lot of NFL players probably do. When we've seen the number of legal cases they've gotten out of trouble and things like that.
Well, and that's a whole different that's a whole other angle, right? That's connected to this, and that is you have these elite professional athletes
making tens of millions of dollars.
I mean, the truth is, many of them make more money in 1 year than most Americans make in a lifetime, right? So they're not the best. They're not the best models of victimhood to be, trotted out there on stage.
Well, and you could say the same thing about actors and
Hollywood
celebrities.
Yeah.
And notice, I don't know if you've noticed this in recent years, but the number of these celebrities who are now realizing we can go start businesses. Liquor companies, CBD companies is the new thing for NFL players. They're all starting CBD companies, and they're getting acquired for tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. I think George Clooney's, it was a tequila company. George Clooney started a tequila company that sold for like $1.6 billion.
We're in the wrong business, Dave.
Right.
We should start distilling some tequila.
One of us needs to be as famous as George Clooney first. But I guarantee there was greasing of the wheels along that process to get around certain regulations or to get certain permits faster than other people can get them or to get buildings built or whatever it might have been.
Yep.
They used their capital, they used their wealth not to just go build a business, but to grease the wheels of the progressives who are, whether it's bureaucrats, government, legislators, the people just outside the bureaucratic sphere.
You've put your finger on something really important. I mean, when we look at you look across civil society in the United States today, and you look at the few who make have tremendous success financially. They're living in the big houses. And you look at the many who have not, and sometimes this corresponds with color lines, and sometimes it doesn't. What you find often, not in all cases, but very often, those who have been very financially successful, very often, there's all kinds of crony favoritism along the way. And that is one of the hard truths of progressivism that I think progressives themselves have a really difficult time getting their mind around this fact. The more regulations you have, the more bureaucracies you have, the more government control you have, it becomes a benefit, becomes an advantage for the biggest corporations, for the wealthiest individuals, because they can buy access. They can bribe the politicians or hire the experts to navigate all these bureaucratic loopholes, or get the government contracts, or get the waiver so that their company, whatever it is they want to do, they're exempt from some regulation that everybody else has to comply with. And upon whose shoulder does all the weight of that regulation and that government control, upon whose shoulder does that weight weigh down heaviest? On the poor people, on the little guys. And that includes poor people of color. It makes it really hard to go start even a very simple, humble business, because you have to have so much capital and so much knowledge and expertise just to navigate through the regulations before you can go start a barber shop, a restaurant, right? A basic kind of small business.
A lemonade stand on the side on your front lawn.
John Stossel, and I've met John Stossel. Have you? Have you met
think
John?
I've seen him live once.
He's a thoughtful guy, and he did a little experiment. This is years ago, but I'm confident you can find this out on the internet, on YouTube somewhere. He gave it an honest effort to go try to open a lemonade stand in Manhattan, New York City, and do it legally, actually comply with everything. He spent an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of money, and he never could. He failed. He could not open it legally, and it was all these bureaucratic hoops. You got to have this form filled out. Then they would say you got to take it to this office. He'd show up at that office, and they would say, no, this isn't the office. You got to submit this form right over there. And this went on and on and on for weeks and months. And if you're a real person trying to feed your family off this business you're trying to start, it gets really ugly. And so this gigantic apparatus of government control, government power, government regulation, and at the same time, they're taking money, government's taking money from you in the form of taxes. It's taking money from you in the form of fees. It's taking money to do many kinds of services. You gotta have a license, and the license it's just another way, right, of milking more money from citizens. Just imagine in this world of progressivism, instead of thinking about what new program can we start, or what additional regulations can we create? Rather than thinking that way, like a progressive, what if we started thinking, how about if we scale back the regulations? How about if we don't require these licenses and we don't charge these fees and we take less money from people, especially the people who don't have much money, and we make sure that they're secure in their person and in their property. And along the let's think of what all that means. Let's scale back some of these municipal police departments that have been highly militarized, that have units that are basically like Marine units, like special forces. Let's scale that back. Let's scale back the whole federal drug code, right, and that whole apparatus, all of which, I made a comment just recently. Someone asked me, Tom, what should be done to help solve the problem of racial injustice? There are instances of cops abusing and harassing and hurting, and in some cases even murdering, right, black people. And what do we do to solve that? And I said, well, the very first step, repeal everything Joe Biden has ever passed. Because right. Joe Biden, he not only passed, he in many cases he sponsored or actually wrote all this legislation that militarized. I'm talking about city police departments. I'm not talking about the special forces in the Army or the Marines. I'm talking about ordinary cops. He militarized the police departments. He passed laws that increased immunity. Think about that problem of police abuse of black people. And then we have a law passed by Joe Biden that expands immunity for bad cops,
right,
shields bad cops so that they're not accountable for their bad actions. All those kinds of things. Get rid of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Get rid of it. And I guarantee you would see a foundational, fundamental transformation in the way not only black Americans live, but all Americans.
So let's bring this full circle back to this idea of how has politics taken over everything? How has it gotten intertwined in everything? And I think everything we just talked about can be summarized in, we have stopped talking about the solution is less government. Mm-hmm. The solution is less bureaucracy. The solution is less cronyism. And essentially, it's as if when you're talking about sports, when you're talking about theater, when you're talking about these different daily life activities that were intended to be fun, they've almost turned them into a non-financial form of cronyism. If you want to enjoy these things again, you're going to change the government. You're going to listen to us, and you're going to create government. I never got the sense that Colin Kaepernick was sitting there saying, "Hey, NFL, you have bad policies. You need to change these policies." There were a few things that got brought up, but this whole thing started by him wearing socks that depicted police as pigs, and him kneeling for the national anthem in protest of what's happening in the country and with government abuse of people.
Right.
And I don't care where you fall on the spectrum of how bad it is, right? No, I don't think any of us want a single bad cop to be out there. We would like all cops to be good people. And I have a lot of friends who are police, and I think the world of them. Mm-hmm. One of my closest friends out there is a cop, and I think the world of him. I think he's a great human being. I think he is a very thoughtful person. I think he cares about people quite a bit. And we'd like everybody to be like that. We'd like all the cops to be like that. Colin Kaepernick wasn't wrong in saying that there are some bad cops out there. The question is, what did he want? And why was he using this I'm gonna try to convince people to take the NFL hostage as a form of cronyism,
Right.
to actually try to reach something that I don't know what the eventual goal was.
Well, and it's really interesting when you think about the NFL, like any big business, like any industry. It's not as if the NFL is just operating out there in the realm of freedom or free enterprise or free markets, and they decide to use that as a platform to talk about government. Oh no, government has its tentacles, to use the metaphor you mentioned before. The tentacles of government power wrap all around
Right.
the NFL. From the kinds of contracts, how they run the league, to the stadiums they build. Most of the stadiums are built with taxpayer. They're subsidized by taxpayers, which is government taking money from some people and giving it to others, in this case, NFL teams, to build their stadiums. And yet, my understanding, and I invite if I'm wrong about this, I invite someone to correct me. My understanding is the NFL players are not protesting the near total government control of the NFL, right? That's not their they're not protesting what the government has done to the NFL. They're standing there saying, yeah, we're okay with government being involved in all kinds of ways, including building our stadiums. That's okay.
Well, why would they? Why would they criticize? This is the same. We've made the argument in the past, podcasts, toolbox videos, case studies. We've made the argument that regulations help big business, right? And we've had some discussions with members about this who say no, it hurts, but in the long run, these regulations are keeping fewer teams out there, less competition, less competition for. Or more competition for spots. But if you make it, if you are the best of the best, you're going to get paid a whole lot more than if there was a big supply or whatever else. So they want these regulations. They don't want more teams out there. They don't want more leagues.
Dave, how difficult would it be for you and I this afternoon to go start an alternative professional football league? How difficult would that be?
Let's take that a step back. Forget another league.
Okay.
Start another team.
A team.
Just start a team. I don't want to have to go find other owners. I don't want to have to just start another team.
And what if we bought the land? What if you and I saved up our money and we bought a chunk of land south side of Denver, and we're going to build a stadium on it, and that's going to be home of our team.
We'd have to go hire the best lobbying group in the state of Colorado to go lobby Congress to change go lobby the state legislature to change the law that says you can't build another stadium within a certain distance of I guess it's now called Empower Field at Mile High.
Right. All regular people just say Mile High Stadium. Yeah.
Right.
It's always been that. I know.
I was going to go down a whole other rabbit hole, and I'm going to stop myself.
Yeah.
But you can't build another stadium. The teams aren't allowed to play against you, even if you did, right? I could go sign all the best players and everything else. If I could convince them to come play for my team instead, can't participate in the league. The league has said no. These are our teams, and we won't play against anybody else. Probably are going to have trouble getting the right insurance, and you're probably going to have the trouble getting all of the right. I mean, it's nearly impossible. I don't think that there's a financial number that you could put on it, unless you were to have enough money to basically buy the entire NFL. And now we're talking what Apple has in its cash reserves.
Right. So in other words, right, government is involved in all kinds of ways, even in these teams and many industries. But we're in this curious space today where employees at businesses, and let's be very clear, professional athletes are employees. They're employees who sign a contract. They agree to do certain things in return for a certain compensation. That's called a job where I come from, and they're the employee. But they're not complaining about what government has done to their business or to their industry,
right?
Even though government has done much to it. And that might be one of the places to begin looking. Look at all the things government has done right there in your – get rid of all those regulations, all those subsidies, because what you do is you open the door to freer kinds of markets, Some people call it capitalism, free people making their own choices, doing what they want with their own property. Instead, you have these employees saying, we don't like what's going on outside this business, outside this stadium. And you're right, it's unclear to me, maybe to some of our listeners it's clear, it's unclear to me what exactly their goal is. And I don't know, I'll ask you this. What do you think, say if we could have Colin Kaepernick here, and we said, what's your goal? What do you want? If you could wave a wand and make things be the way you want them to be, what would that look like?
There's two aspects that come with it. There has to be two goals here, right? He says he wants an end to racial injustice, right? He says he wants an end to police abuse in black communities, an end to he wants prison reform. He's looking for a change in the way how he sees them being treated in society. We've talked about this idea that I don't really care if somebody's racist as long as they're just sitting on their front porch thinking, I don't like you.
Right. As long as their racism isn't translated into unjust action.
Correct. As long as they're not coming and hurting me, they're not affecting my life. If they want to sit there and not buy my product or not shop with me or not come near me, good. You stay on your porch. You be the recluse in your house.
Right.
I'm going to go out and I'm going to enjoy my life. The problem is, if he wants it to change in government, he has to have a plan for that. And that's where I don't think he has an idea, right? He knows two things. He knows one thing is he believes there's a systemic racial injustice happening in this country. This is a topic we've talked a little bit about. I tend in a lot of ways to agree with him on that. And let me clarify that because a lot of our listeners will say, oh my God, how can you say that? Systems have evolved. The inherent American idea hasn't. The idea that America was founded on is still the idea that America was founded on. The systems to which this country operates today don't even resemble that American idea anymore. And it's Joe Biden's 47 years of policies.
Maybe would this be a good way to describe it? We don't live in a Declaration of Independence America. We live in progressive America.
And in progressive America, Joe Biden has passed crime bills that put more cops in African-American communities, so you're more likely to. When we were growing up, and looking back on this, I kind of don't like this saying anymore, but when we were growing up, we used to joke about, well, you didn't do anything wrong if you don't get caught, right? You'd go off to camp in middle school, and well, if you don't get caught, you didn't do anything wrong. So what does Joe Biden do? He puts more cops, more people in black communities where he thinks crime is higher, and he thinks he's going to be protecting people. I'm not even doubting his motives, right? I don't think that Joe Biden, his connections with Robert Byrd set aside,
right?
I don't think Joe Biden went in there thinking, I really hate black people, and I want to put them all in prison.
I agree with you. Yeah, I too don't. I don't think that was his purpose.
I think he put more police officers in black communities, thinking I can protect these black communities. I can lower crime. I can lower violence, things like that. But instead, he ends up incarcerating them at a much higher level.
Well, a couple things here, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but there are some details that really matter here. One is, at the same time, Joe Biden and many other progressives in government were criminalizing more things, both by actual criminal laws and regulations, which, if you're not in compliance, becomes almost the equivalent of a crime.
And the penalties got stiffer.
That's right. And so if you write enough laws and you pass enough regulations, eventually everything becomes a crime. And so that was happening at the very same time. And then within, here's something I would actually love to have a conversation with someone like Colin Kaepernick, maybe actually him and some of the people who support him. There are internal arrangements within our criminal justice system that are truly appalling when you really start to reflect on them. I'll give you one example. Suppose we know someone who's been accused of a crime, and we're pretty sure they're going to testify in their own trial, criminal trial. and maybe something bad. They might go to prison for a long time. It's a crime for you or me as a friend to talk to him in any way that could be viewed as influencing his testimony, including if you, Dave, said to your friend the morning that he's going to go testify, let's call him Mike, hey, Mike, just tell the truth. Whatever you do up there, just be honest and tell the truth. If that in any way swayed or influenced how he might testify, you could be charged with a crime. At the same time, the government, the prosecuting attorney who represents government power, will come and offer a plea deal and say to the same guy, hey, Mike, we'll offer you this if you change the way you're going to plead, if you change what your testimony is going to be, right? And the result is the majority of people in our federal prisons today are there not because they were actually convicted of a crime proven beyond a reasonable doubt. They're there because government swayed their decision by offering them some plea deal. And a lot of people who are sitting there, especially, hey, if you're a poor black guy and you can't afford fancy lawyers or anything, and you're facing a really long prison sentence, and they say, we'll reduce it down to 5 years or 10 years, right, in exchange for it, a lot of people say, okay, I'll take that deal. I'd rather do 5 years and then have a chance for parole or something like that rather than be in there for 50 years or the rest of my life.
Right. To finish my comment, I don't want to get too far away from it because I really have to be careful when I say we do have a systemic problem. That systemic problem is progressivism. That systemic problem is we have put government in control of everything. We have criminalized more things than ever. You don't get in trouble unless you got caught. You didn't do anything wrong unless you got caught. Now gets applied to, we're going to catch more of you in these areas. And now it does start to look like the system is against you, right? And for somebody like Colin Kaepernick, he doesn't view the world as freedom versus progressive control. He views a progressive America. And the only way to change anything is, does progressivism take on this form or does progressivism take on that form?
Are there going to be progressive policies that give special advantages to this group or to that group?
Right.
I don't, it's the other groups have been getting the advantages in the past, and so I'm angry, right? That's the form of progressive protest. I want some special perks and benefits too.
And if that's all you know, and you're saying the only way, and he's kind of right, the only way we're going to get fewer Black Americans being incarcerated, or more Black Americans getting opportunities to go build businesses and go be successful. If you want to be that, you're going to start fighting for the election of that person.
Right.
And what it has come down to, or what it appears to come down to, is this perception that one side, that the Republicans are trying to vote for a progressivism that is pro-white people and holds Black people back. And there's the progressivism that he wants that holds white people back so that Black people get this opportunity. And I'm sitting here thinking, that's why they're fighting. That's why every single thing in our life has become politicized.
We've talked about this in both Toolbox series as well as prior podcasts, that intrinsic to progressivism. This is what progressivism is. It requires dividing citizens into groups. Government dividing citizens into groups, and then treating different groups differently, offering benefits and subsidies to some, putting special burdens or special suspicions on others. And so what tends to develop within the arena of progressive politics, when you have progressives fighting progressives, which is sort of where we are today, the only question is which groups are going to get which benefits and which groups are going to suffer which kinds of burdens.
And I sit here and I wonder, and I feel like it's a far-off dream that we're just so far away from. But these athletes, these entertainers, these Hollywood people, they make so much money. An extra million a year, for many of them, is not even interesting, right? It doesn't even, it wouldn't change their lifestyle for a second.
Right.
Don't endorse a product that you're getting paid for, and instead go say, hey, here's somebody in my community that's doing something that I really like. I'm going to go be there and I'm going to go endorse their product, and I'm not going to charge them because I can actually help them. And this goes back to a conversation we've also been having that we had in the last podcast about assistance by choice,
right,
rather than assistance by government. If Colin Kaepernick says, I'm making X amount a year as a football player, or now he's making X amount a year as an author or whatever else, maybe he's not the best example, but there are plenty of players out there. LeBron James is making plenty of money. You have baseball players, Mike Trout making $426 million over his contract. These guys could just as easily say, my way of helping somebody else, the way I want to assist somebody, is I want to find that right entrepreneur. I want to find that person who's doing something great. Maybe it's giving them a few dollars of an investment, but maybe it's just going and endorsing their product. Maybe it's using their platform.
Sure.
And instead of spending all this time fighting over which government policies and over the politics, because progressivism has taught them that it doesn't matter, right? Progressivism in their mind has taught them that it doesn't matter if I go endorse John's product down the street or Mike's product in my old neighborhood.
I'm thinking of some sort of line along the MAGA line. Make assistance personal again, or make right, assistance voluntary again, because that is the way we depoliticize. We've been talking about politicizing everything. 100 years ago, if one of your parents or your grandparents needed, I don't know, some big surgery, hip replacement. Grandpa needs a hip replacement. Well, there were several possibilities. One possibility is Grandpa was really productive, created lots of wealth in his life, and he can just pay for a hip surgery. Okay, great, knock yourself out. And even then, Grandpa might decide, I'm too old, I don't want to go through that surgery. I think the surgery will be worse for me than the bad hip. Okay, that's your choice. You make that decision. Or, more likely, Grandpa doesn't have enough money. He didn't create enough wealth. He hasn't saved enough. And so what would he do? He would ask for help. And he would turn to his family. He would turn to his friends. And there would be sort of a revealing moment. Has he treated his family and his friends well? If he has, they would probably say, we really want to help. And maybe they would offer to pool together their resources and pay for the surgery. And maybe he treated them very cruelly and terribly. Maybe they say, screw you. You've been horrible to me my whole life. I'm not going to help you. You should have thought about that. Either way this goes, these are all personal matters. They're not political, right? In all those scenarios I just laid out, not one of them has anything to do with who you're going to vote for in the next election. It's all about personal relationships. But once government gets involved in these things, once government gets involved, say, in healthcare, now all of a sudden, immediately the question of Grandpa needs a hip replacement, well, why doesn't his health insurance cover it? We need universal health care. I'm going to vote for, Joe Biden, who promises universal health care.
I think it's even worse than that. I think there's a step beyond that it's gotten to in many parts of the world and it's getting to in the United States. Under progressivism, it's not even why doesn't he have universal health care? It's even if he has universal health care, the government has to give you permission to use it.
Oh, that's true.
And in certain cases,
they say
you
no.
if you have the financial means, or you have family willing to help, or you have strangers willing to help, GoFundMe or things like that, you could have strangers willing to help you because they think, man, this older woman, she really lived a great life. She did a lot of great things for her community. She was really a wonderful person. We loved having her in our community, and now she broke her hip. And it wasn't, we want to help her. We want to make her feel better. And then the government steps in and says, yeah, no, she has universal health care. And that's not a good use of universal funds. Well, we'll pay for it. No, that sets a bad precedent. And where did we see that? We saw that, a year and a half ago with the baby in London. You had the baby who was sick, and the family had the money. Whether I don't know if it was their own, I don't know if it was family, I don't know if it was friends, but they had the money. They wanted to private charter their child to the United States to get care because there was a doctor here capable of helping their child. And the British government said, no, you can't do that.
You're right.
That's the progressivism that we are inching towards.
That's the central planning, right? That progressivism means that's what central planning means. Other people, bureaucrats, making choices for you.
In the name of some form of fairness, right?
Right.
It's not fair that you have the money to go or that somebody's willing to give you the money and go get your child treated in another country. So therefore we're not going to let you do it.
And we see this, by the way, when you look at socialists and all the socialist and communist tyrannies over the last century, what you find is you do find an equality of lifestyle, but it's not an equality at a high level. It's an equality at the lowest common denominator, right? Meaning everyone lives in a crummy house. Everyone's hungry because they don't have enough food. That's the equality of lifestyle, with one exception. Those connected to the government, of course, always live in the palaces and the mansions, and they have the private butlers and drivers and things like that. That always happens.
There's always a Marie Antoinette.
Yes.
Whether it's an official title or it's anything else, there's always one or more.
Right.
As we saw with Nancy Pelosi in recent weeks.
So, Dave, I think I'm gonna bring us to a close here, just on this big general point, and we've talked about this in a number of different ways in this podcast. The solution to our problems is not progressivism. Progressivism is the cause of our problems. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at all the great challenges in the United States today, socially, politically, culturally, economically, in matters of justice, the answer is going in the direction of scaling back progressivism. Scale back government power, government control, government regulation, government subsidy, government oversight of our lives, government criminalizing more and more things. Scale that back. Let's have less of that so that people can be freer, so that they are more secure, and they will experience less injustice in their lives.
And if we do that, I really do hope that whether it's Colin Kaepernick or whether it's LeBron James or whether it's people in Hollywood or anywhere else start to realize there is an option other than government controls in this way or government controls in that way, but government's always in control.
They're only going to know that if they know about why America is good, if they know about the American idea, which is why it's more important than ever that we have citizens guarding that American idea. And that's what we do at the Vino Veritas Society. So let's close out with our motto, No Sumos Custodes.
We are the guardians.
We are the guardians.
See you next week.